The discussion rapidly intensified, bypassing typical opening remarks when Bill Maher introduced the ridiculousness of the West Point Alumni Association rescinding an honor intended for Tom Hanks. Motivated solely by Donald Trump's branding of him as woke and destructive, Bill Maher instantly highlighted the divisiveness, asserting clearly that the retraction occurred only because the association members abruptly recognized, "Hold on, Tom Hanks. Oh, we didn't remember he's on the blue team. To hell with him." Maher emphasized the profound injustice of this partisan vendetta targeting a man possessing an unblemished history of service and acting as a patriot specifically for the armed forces, referencing movies such as Saving Private Ryan and Greyhound. Yet, while denouncing the association, Maher admitted to having his own grievance, conceding he disliked it when Tom Hanks appeared on Saturday Night Live performing a skit where he wore a MAGA cap and refused to shake a black person's hand, labeling the skit unhelpful. Ben Shapiro swiftly interjected, pointedly declaring, "I take issue. I found it to be an excellent sketch," thus directly opposing Maher's cultural interpretation. Shapiro maintained that Maher had misunderstood the whole message, clarifying that the follow-up, Doug, skit was designed to show that the blue-collar, heartland white man in the MAGA hat truly shared a massive amount in common with the black panelists, against whom he was vying. Shapiro perceived the skit as a unifying piece, whereas Maher regarded the refusal to shake hands as introducing needless toxicity into an already highly charged domain. In Maher's view, irrespective of the creative goal, that one action escalated the matter to that degree of animosity, which he deemed fundamentally detrimental to the nation's reconciliation. The pair soon discovered an instance of agreement. Nonetheless, when Maher mentioned the declaration that CBS News would cease editing taped interviews with public figures on Face the Nation, Maher speculated the modification resulted from political influence, particularly noting Kristi Noem's grievances, but affirmed that as an individual who has previously been edited, it was a positive outcome. Shapiro concurred enthusiastically, referencing the latest Gallup poll which indicated that public confidence in television news institutions had dropped to a mere 15% across all Americans. Shapiro contended that any shift toward openness was entirely essential and would not cause harm. This transition to skepticism of institutions organically guided Shapiro to verbalize the primary lessons acquired almost 25 years after 9/11. Shapiro asserted the foremost lesson the West ought to have grasped was that our ability to superimpose our own values onto different nations and populations is simply incorrect. Shapiro referenced President Bush's proclamation that every human heart seeks freedom. Maintaining this Western presupposition was faulty because cultural distinctions create a tremendously significant difference in the ways individuals rank their final goals. Shapiro connected the debacles in Afghanistan and Iraq, coupled with internal catastrophes like Hurricane Katrina and the economic meltdown, to a sweeping, pervasive erosion of confidence that, by the arrival of COVID-19, enveloped almost all societal institutions, spanning media and policing to academia. Shapiro maintained that the American populace has come to the realization that nobody is protecting their interests and that they are unable to trust any of the individuals in authority. This conversation about societal decay permitted Maher to transition to Shapiro's new publication, Lions and Scavengers, pointedly inquiring of Shapiro, "Is Trump a scavenger or a lion?" Shapiro clarified the idea, emphasizing that the categorization is not primarily partisan. He characterized lions as individuals who desired to construct, and scavengers as those who wish to dismantle, perceiving societal structures as dangers. When pushed about the former commander-in-chief, Shapiro admitted that although he perceived lion-like qualities in President Trump, like his far more assertive international strategies, he depicted Trump mainly as unorthodox yet reactive, implying he experiments, and if attempts are unsuccessful, he generally ceases those actions due to his lack of rigid ideology. Maher queried whether Trump failed to fully grasp the difficulty of resolving wars, covertly suggesting an absence of lion-like sagacity. Shapiro provided Zora Mamani as an unambiguous illustration of a scavenger, an individual whose specialty appears to be ruining the property market in New York, elevating crime statistics, and dismantling institutions. The ideological clash between Maher and Shapiro hit its zenith when Maher equated Shapiro's lion, scavenger thesis with the contentious writers Nietzsche and Ayn Rand. Maher subsequently initiated a direct, foundational attack on the origin of Shapiro's moral framework. Maher, the professed atheist, declared that the Bible is replete with absurdity and evil, and is profoundly defective. Maher particularly assailed scriptural sections that permit human bondage and those which regard the sexual violation of a woman as a property offense. Maher insisted on an explanation for why, if the Bible was allegedly flawless and divinely authored, it contained numerous profoundly defective components. Ben Shapiro countered with his central theological argument. Shapiro directly queried Maher as to why the pair, notwithstanding their vast religious disparity, Shapiro being a devout Jew and Maher an atheist, concur on 87.5% of ethical principles. Shapiro supplied his own explanation. We likely matured in close proximity within a Western civilization possessing several millennia of scriptural history underpinning it. Shapiro contended that Maher began life ethically on third base, thinking he formulated his own morals when he actually received them from Judeo-Christian principles. Maher firmly refuted this, maintaining that their common ethics originated from the Enlightenment, which he emphasized was an anti-clerical movement. Shapiro retorted with the powerful metaphor that contemporary secular ethics are akin to cut flowers. They appear lovely and can survive for a period, but lacking the root of religious belief, the framework cannot endure, as it is missing a foundational conviction that a higher authority requires such conduct. Shapiro concluded that fundamental ideas such as the intrinsic worth of human beings are unattainable through pure atheistic logic. They are premises founded on religious faith, since, absent these, people are simply bits of flesh meandering through the cosmos. Lastly, the panel briefly changed topics, as Maher introduced the poorly timed publication of Kamala Harris' book, 107 Days. The primary revelation from the book, rapidly obscured by the news cycle, was Harris' concession that permitting Joe and Jill Biden to determine his re-election candidacy by themselves was irresponsible. Tim Alberta aligned with Maher in censuring Harris, observing that she penned the admission as if she was a junior, low-ranking staff member lacking any power. Alberta contended that if she, the vice president, genuinely believed the determination was irresponsible, she possessed a duty to the nation to speak on it openly, instead of holding back until afterward to critique the decision in her publication. Maher mirrored this feeling, underscoring the paradox of the vice president remaining passive, neglecting to utilize the 25th Amendment, even following an instance in a debate with Donald Trump when he seemed mentally locked up. The whole discussion, spanning from the foundational ethical origins to the institutional timidity shown by a current vice president, underscored the panelists' mutual apprehension that regardless of whether the topic was faith, governance, or the press, the American populace no longer trusts the ruling bodies and the values they profess to champion. The discussion progressed as Maher, after illustrating the partisan malice regarding the Tom Hanks honor and the widespread erosion of institutional confidence, shifted focus to the philosophical basis of Shapiro's writing, likening the lions and scavengers concept to the contentious philosophies of Nietzsche and Ayn Rand. Maher conceded that Shapiro referenced both authors with criticism, yet insisted the theory retained a specific, Nietzschean, inclination, positing that individuals who are more constructive and create deserve rewards, while those who dismantle do not. This prepared the ground for the most foundational clash of the whole show, compelling Maher, the committed atheist, and Shapiro, the orthodox religious advocate, into a head-on conflict regarding the precise origin of contemporary ethics. Maher initiated a direct attack on the idea of divine flawlessness, asserting, if God authored the book, how could it contain elements we dispute, because the text must be either impeccable, or it is simply imperfect and was composed by humans, which it clearly was. In Maher's view, the Bible is replete with absurdity and evil, and profoundly defective. Maher did not avoid details, pressing for an answer as to how a sacred text could include sections allowing human bondage or regarding the sexual violation of a woman as simply a property offense. Maher maintained that modern ethics are vastly better originating not from archaic sacred writings but from the Enlightenment, which he pointedly noted to Shapiro was an anti-clerical movement. Maher referenced Thomas Jefferson, who was a deist rather than a traditional Christian, as an illustration of a person who acknowledged the ethical worth within the Bible but physically excised all the portions he found objectionable. Fashioning his own edition devoid of any miracles, Maher confronted Shapiro. Why? If the Bible is the origin point, do he and all logical individuals disavow the segments pertaining to slavery and property offenses? Shapiro countered this challenge by claiming Maher was experiencing a significant illusion of self-origination. Questioning why he, a devout Jew, and Maher, an atheist, succeed in concurring on approximately 87.5% of ethics. Shapiro supplied his own explanation. Because we likely matured in close proximity within a Western civilization that possesses millennia of scriptural history underpinning it. Shapiro informed Maher pointedly that he began life ethically on third base, implying his non-religious morality was simply a legacy from Judeo-Christian principles, not a direct result of atheistic logic. Shapiro contended that a great deal of what Maher currently accepts as given, like the intrinsic worth assigned to human life, or the traditional emphasis on caring for the widow and the orphan, was not standard or widespread centuries prior and was deeply shaped by the historical turning point symbolized by Christian morality inside and outside the Roman Empire. Shapiro subsequently employed a potent and clarifying metaphor to reject Maher's advocacy for the Enlightenment. Non-religious ethics, in Shapiro's view, are akin to cut flowers. He maintained that the blossom, symbolizing secular humanistic ethics, can survive for a period after being severed from the plant, but lacking the root of religious belief. The framework cannot endure, as it is missing a foundational premise that a higher authority requires such conduct of you. Shapiro asserted that fundamental convictions such as the intrinsic worth of human beings are not concepts attainable purely through logic from a non-theistic perspective. He contended that absent a divine source, people are merely bits of flesh meandering through the cosmos, and no rational, evidence-supported justification exists to assign them intrinsic value. These principles are, consequently, premises founded on religious faith. Shapiro concluded this portion by confronting Maher's whole worldview, asking why, if the rational ethics Maher champions are universal, they're not in the slightest bit universal on planet Earth, and are located chiefly in societies founded on Christianity, unless imposed subsequently by Western cultural power. The fervor of this theological conflict underscored the massive, impassable gulf between the presenter and his guest, stressing that their political disputes originate from completely distinct perspectives on human life and moral duty. The conversation, still processing the fervor of the ethical argument, pivoted sharply to the current political environment with the last topic regarding Vice President Kamala Harris' recently published book, 107 Days. Maher observed the poor timing of the publication and the instant uproar regarding Harris' concession that it was irresponsible to permit Joe and Jill Biden to determine his re-election candidacy completely by themselves. Maher, visibly incensed, assailed Harris' inaction, ridiculing the notion of the 25th Amendment, the constitutional mechanism enabling the vice president and cabinet members to acknowledge a president's incapacity to execute his responsibilities. Maher sarcastically queried, "What if you subsequently remained passive and took no action, until Joe Biden seemed to have his head collapse during a debate with Donald Trump?" Tim Alberta fully concurred with Maher's criticism, censuring Harris for composing the admission as though she were a junior, low-ranking staff member lacking any power. Alberta contended that Harris held the office of vice president, and if she truly felt the determination was irresponsible, she possessed a duty to the nation to speak on it when it happened, not merely in a retrospective publication. Maher finished the show by connecting this episode to the prior conversation regarding institutional confidence, observing the trend where influential individuals like Harris and Mike Pence near the conclusion of the Trump administration neglect to intervene when crucial, only to emerge afterward and say, "Oh well," thus undermining the populace's remaining shreds of belief in those supposedly in authority. Notwithstanding the deep ideological divide separating Maher and Shapiro, one grounded in atheistic logic and the other in premises founded on religious faith. The discussion eventually returned to the subject where their political assessments discovered uncomfortable agreement: the shortcomings of modern political figures. The concluding portion centered on Vice President Kamala Harris, whose new book publication, 107 Days, was instantly eclipsed by other news. Maher ridiculed the title, implying Harris required only an additional day, jesting that if she had possessed 108 days, she perhaps could have triumphed, or maybe needed $1.5 billion extra to broadcast her message. Yet the actual contentious point Maher wished to tackle was Harris' shocking concession inside the book, that permitting Joe and Jill Biden to determine his re-election candidacy completely by themselves was irresponsible. Maher considered this admission deeply angering. Considering Harris' office, he offered a hypothetical scenario, querying the panel about what might occur if a constitutional provision, for instance, the 25th Amendment, existed, enabling the vice president and the cabinet to acknowledge the president's incapacity, and then imagining if that vice president subsequently remained passive and took no action. Maher clearly remembered the instance that required intervention, referencing the debate with Donald Trump when Joe Biden's head essentially collapsed on national television, and he gazed into the vast abyss of death off camera with a locked expression. Nonetheless, irrespective of this open exhibition, Harris delayed, and subsequently opted to document the irresponsibility retrospectively, validating that she had repeatedly stated, almost like a refrain, that the choice was their personal decision. Maher and Alberta jointly censured the vice president's failure to intervene, particularly if she privately believed the circumstances were perilous for the nation. Tim Alberta immediately mirrored Maher's indignation, stating that the difficult aspect of the Harris book was her composition of this serious concession as if she were a junior, low-ranking staff member lacking any power. Alberta emphasized the significance of her position. She holds the office of Vice President of the United States. He connected her passivity directly to the damaging trend observed in other political figures, observing that her behavior was not unlike what Mike Pence did near the conclusion of the Trump administration. Both Pence and Harris, in Alberta's view, delayed until they were securely past the urgent crisis before emerging to say, "Oh well," thus excusing themselves from accountability. Alberta stressed that if the determination was genuinely irresponsible, "Madam Vice President, did you not possess a duty to the nation to speak on it, when it happened?" The foundational criticism at this point, held by the panelists, went beyond simple partisan bickering and connected back to Shapiro's prior thesis concerning the erosion of institutional confidence. Regardless of whether it concerned the debacles in Iraq and Afghanistan, the press's deficiency in openness, or, in this instance, the political leadership's inability to confront power with truth about presidential capability, the populace senses a trend where authorities persistently neglect to execute essential, challenging measures. Maher encapsulated the exasperating circular nature of U.S. politics, asserting, "I like again, this is the reason the nation cannot mend because no one is ever able to." He concluded the portion by indicating the ultimate political cynicism, observing that Trump, only the prior week, had posted, "I suppose we've forfeited India to China," which Maher underscored as one more influential political figure deflecting responsibility. It's like who was responsible for that? The whole conversation, finishing with the shortcomings of the vice presidency, acted as a powerful demonstration of the central topic unifying all the panelists' apprehensions: the profound systemic decay and the total disintegration of responsibility within the nation's highest positions. The ideological dispute between Maher and Shapiro regarding the origin of ethics was consequently mirrored by the political dispute regarding the origin of institutional collapse, leaving the viewers with the grim understanding that the nation's moral and political underpinnings were both considered profoundly unstable by the panel. The participants, still processing the fervor of the ethical argument about the origins of moral conduct, revisited for a moment the sharp details of the ethical chasm that had characterized the discussion center. Maher, resolved to ensure his stance on organized religion was unambiguous, repeated his most biting critiques of the Bible. He emphasized that the text, if genuinely of divine origin, cannot rationally be replete with absurdity and evil, or include elements they dispute. Maher particularly drove home the argument that even ignoring the overall defects, the endorsement of human bondage and the classification of a woman's rape as a property offense, show they were engaging with Bronze Age individuals who possessed a totally distinct and less developed perspective. Maher equated examining the Bible with verifying if there is just one turd in the swimming pool, suggesting that even a single profound defect makes the entire source tainted. Deciding that the Bible is so profoundly defective, even if it were only the slavery issue. Shapiro, while acknowledging the texts needed to resonate with people of that era, supported the religious viewpoint by clarifying the intricate nature of parsing archaic scripture. Shapiro countered Maher's simplistic perspective, observing that the fundamental concept for a devout individual is that God communicates to people of the era, and subsequently, individuals must employ their logic. He referenced the evolved oral history in Judaism and the natural law history in Catholicism as illustrations of how the interplay between logic and belief is not simply accepting things on trust, but a combination of human logic and those principles founded on faith. The difficulty, Shapiro suggested, resided not within the scripture, but in mankind's continuous use of logic upon those archaic, faith-based premises. The discussion momentarily reverted to more flippant, albeit still skeptical, cultural remarks, with Maher unpredictably declaring that Charlie Sheen is akin to the most rational actor in existence. A witty, if jaded, comment that briefly broke the intense atmosphere. Alberta subsequently provided a concluding, balanced counterpoint to the sharpest political skepticism about Joe Biden's capability, which Harris' book had sparked. Alberta explained that although the debate showing was truly awful, a dreadful debate showing from an aged man, Biden, within the tranquility of the Oval Office, remained capable of reaching decisions with his team, distinguishing the open display from the confidential capacity to operate. Alberta observed that the crucial factor was Biden's capability to perform the duties, not his ability to jog or ride a bicycle. In the end, the panel's concluding observation returned to the challenge of settling this political disorder and the incapacity of leaders to accept accountability. Maher bemoaned the profound split, asserting, "I like you know again this is the reason the nation cannot mend because no one is ever able to." He subsequently utilized the last news story of the week as a skeptical concluding note. Trump's post stating, "I suppose we've forfeited India to China." Maher indicated the ridiculousness of this deflected responsibility, querying rhetorically, "It's like who was responsible for that?" The whole segment concluded with a tone of exasperated acceptance, wherein the specific political figures charged with governing, be it the president deflecting blame for foreign policy shortcomings or the vice president deflecting blame for capability, are exactly those who are propagating the storyline of skepticism that Shapiro had comprehensively identified. The show consequently finished with the understanding that the crisis of confidence, be it ethical or governmental, was being intensified each day by the leadership itself.